who is Daniel Sandford, the BBC's former Moscow correspondent and current Home Affairs correspondent. I just want to remind you all to please make sure that your phones are switched to silent. And if you can wait for the microphone when you're asking a question, as we are broadcasting live this evening. Thank you.
Right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event, which is pegged to the Red Web, which is Andrei and Irina's new book. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Andrei and Irina, I mean, they've made it their life's work to try and uncover as much as they can of Russian, essentially the FSB and other agencies' surveillance activities, and particularly their sort of technical capabilities. And that's what this book is all about. So I think a lot of this evening's discussion will be based on their what's very up-to-date book. I mean, it goes right up until the events in Ukraine last year. So let me just make sure you know who everyone is, and then I think they'll each introduce themselves briefly. Andrei Soldatov, one of the authors of the Red Web, and as I say, has made it his life work to stay across how the FSB work, and has written, I think this is your third book in English, is that right?
No, second.
Second book in English, and remains a very popular pundit amongst journalists that cover Russia. Irina Borogan, who's Andrei's partner in crime, or partner in investigation, and does a lot of the heavy lifting, I think. And on my far right, Edin Omanovic, is that the right pronunciation, from Privacy International, who does a lot of the work in Eurasia for Privacy International on how governments are using surveillance there. And Tonya Samsonova, have I got that pronunciation right? Yep. From Echo Moskvy. And for those of you who don't know, Echo Moskvy is sort of the last surviving liberal news station on the radio in Russia, and although it has some issues with government interference, largely manages to kind of carry on editorially along the line that they want to. So without further ado, Andrei, I think you've got some introductory remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction, and thank you for having us. And it's a great opportunity for us to talk at Frontline Club, and not the first time for us, but we just love this place. We think it might be the best place to talk in London. And what our book is about, of course, it's not only about surveillance, it's about the Russian internet, it's about the development of the Russian internet and how it started. And but at the same time, the book, which is all about the internet, starts in 1949. And there are some reasons for that. There is a famous saying in Russian, this is not a phone conversation, which means that all Soviet citizens back in Soviet times were quite certain that when their phone calls might be intercepted and their phone might be tracked by the KGB. This saying is still in use today, and that reflects this continuity of some habits that we inherited from the Soviet past. I was always fascinated by the famous novel of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the most famous maybe Russian writer of the 20th century, The First Circle. And the story in this novel is about a foreign ministry official who one day in the winter of 1949 decided to go to the streets of Moscow to find a phone box and to make a call to the US embassy and to tell a diplomat on duty that a Russian Soviet spy, George Koval, was to go to New York and to steal the American atomic bomb. His phone call was intercepted and they recorded, and the recordings was sent to Marfina, a famous sharashka where Alexander Solzhenitsyn was imprisoned. And after a few days, this voice sample was identified, and a foreign ministry official was caught. This story was for real. It was a real story, and even George Koval was real. And his name actually is the only real name in the novel. This guy actually lived until 2006, and in 2006 he was given an award as a hero of Russian Federation. And Vladimir Putin himself said that Koval was the most professional, the most productive Soviet spy during the war. But the story is not about this spy. The story of our book is about technologies. The thing is that technologies and methods used to identify a traitor, a foreign minister officials who betrayed Georges Caval to Americans, these technologies were not forgotten, and the archives of and all papers of all people who worked in Marfina were transferred to another Sharashka called Kuchina. And 45 years later, in late 1980s, Kuchina, the leading research project of the KGB, and when it was still under control of the KGB, was the birthplace for the Russian system of communication interception, which is now known as SORM, System of Operative Research Measures. This system was first time implemented in 1992 and have been updated ever since. And the latest version of SORM we got this April. Now it's combined with deep packet inspection, which is the most intrusive Western spying technology online. But the thing is that the methods and the principles of surveillance were still the same. And these principles, the most important principle of the Russian system of surveillance is that it's actually a backdoor to all Russian communications. And the idea of Russian approach to surveillance is to provide a direct and remote access to all servers, all networks on Russian soil. There is a big difference between Russian approach and Western approach to lawful interception. And the Western approach is about, I don't want to give you lots of technicalities, but essentially it's about one thing. It's about that between the operator and law enforcement agency or security agency, there are two lines of communications. The first line is used to send a court warrant. And then the operator, the telecommunication company, starts intercept stuff and send it back using the second channel to law enforcement agency. In Russia, we have only one line, and this line is used not to send any court warrant, but to get direct access to servers of the company. And personnel of company knows nothing about what is intercepted on its lines, because personnel of this company has no security clearance. That means that the situation resulted in national system of surveillance, which now combines all things from phone calls to emails to social networks, and this system is replicated all over the country. So we have every Russian operator, every Russian telecommunication company should have a license, and one of the points of his license is to provide direct access to the Russian security services. Of course, so we still dealing with this Soviet legacy, but it's only one point. The second point of what we discovered when we researched the book is that we have this strange relationship between the state and telecommunications industry. They used to be very close, and actually communications industry was so close to the military-industrial complex that sometimes it was really difficult to find where actually the military-industrial complex ends and telecommunications starts. Sometimes people might migrate and move from security services to telecommunications, and then from telecommunications to security services. That means that when the FSB and Russian authorities introduced new repressive measures, first in terms of surveillance, then in terms of internet filtering, starting in 2012, all these measures were met with actually lack of resistance from the industry. Nobody wanted to challenge what actually is going on. There was only one point why companies were not entirely happy. And this point was about money, because in Russia, all telecommunications companies should pay for this equipment. They should buy this equipment under orders of the FSB, and they are not entirely happy with that. That's all only about money. And the third point, the last point, why we think this Soviet legacy is still essential in time of the internet is the mentality. The thing is that we got this technical intelligentsia, which was very numerous during the Soviet times, and we still have and we still enjoy very advanced technical intelligentsia in Russia. But these people are not only very close to the military-industrial complex, many of them worked and still work for the military-industrial complex. They have very special kind of education. There is not such a thing as training in ethics. There are no such courses in Russian technical universities. Nobody asks these questions about how this or that technology might be used by the state. That's why for our book, we asked lots of questions and talked to many of Russian engineers who work in this field and developing new and new surveillance technologies, which might be extremely good. They told us the same thing. Well, it's not the fault of technology. This technology might be used by anyone, so why we should care about these things? So they never question it. They never tried to ask this question, and it's still the case. The last thing I wanted to point out is that despite all these things we think about the all-powerful KGB, in terms of surveillance, Soviet KGB was not really sophisticated. It was a big surprise for us to find out that in 1991, just before the Soviet Union collapsed, the KGB was capable to wire up only 300 phone lines in Moscow simultaneously. It was nothing in comparison with Stasi. It was nothing in comparison with other countries. The problem was that at the same time, all Soviet citizens were certain that they should be very careful talking on the phone. And it seems that the Soviet approach to control the population was to instigate self-censorship and to intimidate people, rather to use technology. And it seems that it's still the case today. Russian system of surveillance online is not very sophisticated. Russian system of internet filtering is very, very backward. Actually, if you want to access block of Navalny, you can use very basic tools. The problem is that the Russian state is extremely skillful in sending a message. You might be spied on, be careful. And in the country with very recent totalitarian past, one needs to be only reminded of what might happen. That's enough. You get this fear, and that works. And now I give a floor to Irina. Okay, can I get some water?
Andrei painted a very gloomy picture. And indeed, we are talking about surveillance and combined with intimidation in an authoritarian country where people are punished and even jailed just for expressing their opinion online. But I want to put some optimism into this picture, and we try to make our book optimistic, and we were criticized for this by many reviewers. But at the same time, I think that there is some room for hope, and I try to explain you where is the hope here in this picture. Really, Putin, the strategy Putin tried to apply to the internet was very similar to that he has used against the traditional media in the early 2000s. And that time, traditional media were just handed over to the hands of pro-Kremlin oligarchs, and editors were intimidated. And the strategy paid off because it was very cheap for the Kremlin, and many journalists understood that to keep their jobs, they have to be away from trouble, and it was strong, a powerful message. Here in this room, Evgeny Kiselyov, who is the former chief of NTV company, the most popular and really great television company in Russia, first really independent, and he can say more about how Kremlin suppressed the traditional media. But as in terms of internet, he tried to repeat this approach to the internet, and there could be some problem because after Arab Spring and Moscow protests in 2011-2012, the internet became the biggest challenge for the Kremlin, because before this, Kremlin didn't believe that internet could have some prominence. And once again, as before, the Kremlin's approach was based more on intimidation rather than mass repressions or technology. And because Putin mostly believes that all things exist with hierarchical structure, and everything could be ruled from the top. If you put pressure on the guy on the top, you can rule all things. But we all know that, and creators of internet many times told us that the networks have no center, and networks have no tops. Everyone could participate. You don't need authorization from anybody to take part into the network and to put your information inside. And the most fascinating example has happened with Russian social network Vkontakte. It's the most popular social network in the country, modeled after Facebook. The same, very similar too. In last year, in 2014, this social network was put under Kremlin control, and the guy who was a founder of the social network was expelled from the country, and he was replaced by another guy who is the son of a chief of the state television empire in Russia. And nevertheless, and then we got the conflict in Ukraine, and the Russian authority denied the Russian military presence in the Ukraine conflict. But nevertheless, very soon, in summer last year, Ukrainian and Russian journalists started to find dozens of profiles of Russian soldiers on Vkontakte who exploited who boasted of their exploits in Ukraine, and there were a lot of proofs on the net. Their names, photographs, their locations, names of units, and it was enough to understand that of what Russian military were doing in the Ukraine conflict. So I promised to put a bit optimism into the picture, and I just wanted to show you that even if you suppress, even you change the leadership of the company that is a social network, you can't prevent people from disseminating information on the network, because in the network the content is generated by people. Even they are Russian soldiers and knew nothing about the problem and leadership of social network, and maybe not very aware about the problem in the country. So that's all.
So Edin, obviously you spent a bit of time monitoring the bigger picture across Eurasia. Do you want to just tell us a bit about where you stand on Russia and surveillance and the internet?
So Privacy International as a whole has been working with Andrei and Irina for a few years and been lucky enough to do so. I first came across their work when you were looking at the surveillance and exposing the surveillance that was going on in Sochi during the Olympics, and also SORM, which is this Russian, as you explained, the system of surveillance. And this book is really a great way of putting all this information that you have into a great narrative and into a bigger perspective. So congratulations on that. It's a really, really good book. As a Balkan person as well, I also have to say congratulations, because you talk about the breakup of the internet along national boundaries, and this kind of concept of digital sovereignty, which is big in internet governance at the moment, and you never use the term Balkanization once, which is absolutely glorious to hear. So kind of four main themes jumped out from the book at me. I'll just run through them quickly. The first one's kind of related to the surveillance industry, and it's probably the most boring. So when we first came across SORM, it was in the context of studying surveillance in Eurasia, and we're trying to understand the technical capacity of it, what it was, where it came from. So I remember having to try and Google in Cyrillic. I don't speak Russian at all. Coming across some journal articles, trying to download them, then trying to translate these incredibly complex journal articles about this oblique Russian system of surveillance, and then trying to understand it. And it's just impossible. You can't do it. And what this book does is really open up a new front in our understanding of surveillance, and in such a good and accessible way, which is great. The kind of main thing that jumped out for me is that, although it's about Russia, what you see happening from Russia is very similar in other parts of the world. So the book traces the roots of these private surveillance companies who export their equipment across the world, and just actually how interlinked they are with the Russian state in their formative years, and how close they are, and they continue to be so. And you see this happening across the world. So in Israel, which is one of the kind of largest manufacturers of surveillance technology, the companies there come from the military establishment. They're very, very tightly intertwined with the government, and their equipment is exported across the world. And you see this in places like Germany, where some of the companies come from developments that happened during the Stasi. You see this even in the UK and US, where some of the companies who are exporting surveillance equipment abroad are essentially come from relationships to their state and are basically defense contractors in these countries. And it's very, very good to get a Russian perspective on that and see how it works there. The second point would be towards Edward Snowden. Reading some of the reviews online, it's something that people focused on within the book, because Snowden is such, obviously, a controversial and media-friendly figure. You only kind of see him being referred to as hero who's exposed unlawful surveillance worldwide, or as a traitor who's undermined national security. So it's interesting to get another perspective, and interesting to see actually how Snowden and that whole episode has played into the hands of propaganda within Russia and so on. Don't know if anyone's noticed, but Snowden is now on Twitter, and Andrei's been tweeting with him or at him today. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Another point really is what the book tells us about countries in transition, post-socialist countries in general. And here I just want to refer to Macedonia, where a wiretapping scandal has been ongoing this whole year. So in February, the opposition started publishing evidence that the government has, over the period of a few years, basically been illegally wiretapping some 20,000 people, including members of the opposition, journalists, activists, judiciary, even members of their own government. And they were able to do that by installing his own cousin as head of the intelligence agency. Now, what's kind of interesting there is that there's real parallels with what's going on in Russia at the moment. So a lot of independent media have been closed down, a lot of the owners have been forced to sell, and the kind of pro-government oligarchs have been buying them up. There's a lot of kind of self-censorship going on amongst the journalists across Macedonia. And you talk about in your book how Putin's worldview has been very much shaped by the KGB and the kind of FSB power over policy. And you kind of see that in a lot of kind of post-Soviet states, where the kind of methods of state control remain the same. However much the ideology different is, you know, it's not socialist anymore, it might be more nationalist, but the methods of state control still very much remain the same and very much kind of hark back to that time. And it's a very interesting example of that, I think. And then the kind of fourth main point that I got from it, and the book is kind of shaped in this way, it's that it's a narrative between how new technology is changing the world and being a force for liberation, compared to how new technology is actually a force for oppression. And it's very much shaped in that narrative. So you talk about the horizontal approach that new media is providing, as opposed to the kind of vertical power structures that old governments had. And it's a very interesting perspective on it, and a great summary, and there's loads of examples of both. At the moment, it's very, very hard to tell where this is going. So, like, as you said, 300 simultaneous lines in Moscow at the height of the KGB, 4,000 by the Stasi. If you look at Macedonia, from 1945 to 91, there were some 15,000 files on people. In the space of the last 5 years, there's been some 20,000 just in the last 5 years alone. Even a country like Bangladesh, with quite a dysfunctional security service, is able to now simultaneously record some 60,000 people. The revelations last week about GCHQ is that by 2012 they were looking to store some 100 billion individual records of metadata. So you see that, like, whilst we have great new opportunities for liberation and for social advancement, we also have great opportunities for social control. And the only kind of thing that we'll be able to make sure that we stop the element of social control and use it for liberation is access to more information about surveillance, access to how it's actually being conducted, and transparency. And that's something that this book really provides and will be great for.
And Tonya, if you can just tell us a bit about what it's like being in a journalistic atmosphere where people are listening to people's conversations, reading each other's emails, and that information is being used as part of a sort of information war. Can you give us a bit of a perspective on that?
I would like to say that surveillance is not just digital technology, it's a social technology as well. So when you have the data upon your rivals or political opponents, you need to be wise enough to use it. And when we're talking about like what is the longest political institution that we have in Russia, and what is the real buckle of Russian society, probably, as Andrei mentioned, that his book starts from 1949. Well, the methods and the social methods of surveillance starts even earlier. And that continues. And when you ask people who were like active in the power in 90s, why wouldn't you destroy this whole army of people who were surveilling on you, who were like pushing on you and were trying to frighten you? Why wouldn't you imprison them? They would say, well, it seemed unimportant to them at that time. And then you ask, okay, what is with those people who detained you and who interrogated you before 90s? What happened with them now? And they would say they're on the same positions, or their children. And this is the really generation to generation class that continues, I believe, from the very beginning of the Soviet era. About the technological part of the surveillance, that's actually funny. As also Andrei mentioned, the nature of the telecommunication surveillance is that you do not intercept it from a private company secretly, but you actually give a license, and they are paid to have a special room, a special thing in their office where only people who were security cleared has an access, and basically all the engineers of the company and probably the CEO of the company doesn't have an access to it. But instead of that, people in uniform can access it anytime and intercept all the information. Why do I know this? Because all the generations of my family are engineers who actually do not have an access, but they go in every day to the office, see this door. And by this door, you can judge what kind of a political regime you have in the country. So when for the first time in my mother's life, this door was opened by two people in the uniform, she said, well, something changing. And that was the beginning of 90s. Then again, this door was locked, and it was the beginning of the Putin's era. And she said, like, well, something's changing, definitely. People came, and they locked the door. And it was open for I would say, 10 years or something like that. And then President Medvedev came into the power, and it was the era of hopes, and we were thinking that we're back on the track to the democracy. And my mom said, no, the door is locked. So the door is still locked, but it's not only about the door, it's about how you use the information. And that's funny enough because, well, my grandfather, who also worked as an engineer and he just established like telephone lines to connect Brezhnev with India or something. And he was always very annoying, saying to me, it's not a telephone communication. And it was the year 2007, for example, before the revolution, and we were ready to come and to change this country. And when he was saying, like, it's not a telephone communication, it's like, come on, it's not Soviet Union anymore. Why do you tell these things? He was right. And when you suddenly realize that all your emails or emails you've sent to more important people than you are could be easily published, you start to think what you're actually writing. And when, for example, you try to get an interview from a person who has a very bad reputation on one hand, and on the other hand, you need to be nice to her, actually for her to agree to give you an interview, you would say like, dear Miss blah, blah, blah. Dear, isn't that too, because this will be published in 2 months. And then you write very directly but politely and with a business tone, and then eventually the Russian polite form is that with kind respect, and you put your name. I was thinking that definitely will be published. And there will be with a kind respect, Tonya. I don't have any kind respect to her. So I decided to call. Then suddenly, after the Bolotnaya case, in which some of my friends were involved, that was the case that before the inauguration of Vladimir Putin, there was a meeting in Moscow, and there was lots of security there, and I was pregnant, and I was sitting in the cafe and observing the situation because that was unsafe to be inside. I was like 8 months pregnant on the 9th month or something like that. So I was sitting there, and the cafe was locked, but I had an excuse because, like, you know, I'm a pregnant woman, you have to let me in. It was a perfectly observing place from there. There was a lot of people with iPhones like this, looking and putting something down. And I'm a chatty person. Most of them were from FSB. And we sat there for like the whole evening, and I said like, look mate, you were videotaping something. He said yes. Do you have these tapes? Yes. Could you sell them? Not in front of my colleagues. And turned out that the whole cafe were his colleagues. So I said, okay. He said, sit here, I will return in 2 hours. And I realized that there were detentions, people were beaten up. This would be used. And this is like the real data that could be used in the courts afterwards. He said, sit here, I'll get back to you in 2 hours. So it's 12 p.m., I'm sitting there. I'm scared to go to the toilet because I know what if he comes, then I'm in the toilet. So I'm like, then he came. He said, like, how much could you pay? Hold my salary. Okay, I will give it to you tomorrow. But if you do something wrong with it, I know you will kill me. You know where I'm living. You know the number of my car. You know where my kids are living. Everything. He never turned up though. But he told me I wasn't probably a very good journalist. He told me what will happen on the next day, on the following day. That there will be detentions, people are planning this and that, and he knew that because he were listening to the opposition leaders for their phones. And he knows exactly what are the plans, where to meet, where to go, what to do next, and he was preparing with the whole of his team. And after that, you like spend half a year, people are detained, somebody are imprisoned. And then somebody comes to you, to one of the journalists, and says, look, would you like to listen actually? What were they talking about on that flat? Would you like to know who wanted what? And in this situation, like some of the journalists agree to know, and this is illegal. And you are listening to people whom you know and with whom you work, and this is illegal. But you're a journalist and you have a right to know. You think so. And you'd never know how they actually spread this information to play this chess game. And after that, when you're living in this situation for a year, for a year and a half, what happens next is that people from the opposition start to spy on each other. And then the only thing you can actually do is to be 100% transparent, to publish everything you know online, to have like written here on your face, if you want to tell me something in secret, this will be published tomorrow or even this evening on my Twitter. I have many of my friends who can't talk to me on these ground rules, and I say I publish a manifesto. Everything you tell me wouldn't be private. Don't tell me anything you wouldn't like to see on my Twitter. And sometimes I have to leave the room when my friends are talking about something. But in most of the cases, I feel secure because I wouldn't be the cause of their of the problems they would have.
Right. I'll open the floor up to questions just in a couple of minutes, but just a couple of things I wanted to nail down just to clarify. I mean, your book seems to be about two things going on. It's the development of the internet and the state wrestling with that and its desire to control that, but also the media and how the state's control over the media, which was quite clear in the Soviet Union and became quite clear again in the early 2000s after Putin kind of eliminated NTV and so on, became harder and harder as the media stopped being these hierarchical organizations that you were talking about and became social media. So my question's, long start to it, the question's a simple one. Do you think in the end that Putin's government or the government that comes after is going to eventually be able to bring the whole thing back under its control? Or do you think, in fact, it's an impossible task?
Well, I don't think that there is a simple answer to that. I think the thing is that I don't think it might be possible because the Russian system of control is mostly about how to control few troublemakers. Again, it's a legacy of the Soviet Union. We had very few, actually, maybe 2,000 dissidents at most in the 80s. So it was about relatively small group of people, and the whole of KGB, which was about 200,000, maybe 250,000 people, was focused on trying to control these 2,000 people. And again, the Russian system, the modern Russian system of surveillance and control of the internet is focused on these few troublemakers. The interesting thing about surveillance in Russia is they actually spy on people who are already identified by them. We never try to identify new guys. We never try to establish who might be the new leaders of protest. We already have the list, and then we follow this list. Which is a good thing on the one hand. But that means that when you are dealing with thousands of people, millions of people who talk and who are users of social networks, the Russian authorities have no means to control social networks. The problem, and now I'm trying to get back to your question about traditional media, is, well, it's not so rosy in a way, because I remember well, I started working as a journalist in 1996. I worked for a newspaper, Сегодня, which was closed down by the authorities. It was part of the media empire of Media Most, and so NTV was also part of his empire. And I remember well that what happened with journalists, that many journalists started to leave traditional media, and they launched lots of blogs. On the first, well, you think that it was a very good thing because you immediately you got the internet space dominated by liberal-minded activists and journalists, and they write all kind of things they want to write. The problem here is that you can investigate things only if you are, sorry to say, a paid journalist. If you've had your job, if you have a budget for investigations, if you can go to some distant place, if you can report from the North Caucasus. And of course it was impossible for all these columnists, which we have this flourish, well, thousands of bloggers, but these people,
it's all opinion and no facts.
It was
kind of
all about commenting on what's going on TV. It might be very, well, maybe the language was good, maybe it was beautifully written, but it adds nothing to understanding of what's going on in, say, the Kremlin. And still, it's a very big problem. For example, Facebook now in Moscow is the most popular social network. We chat about every, I don't know, few minutes. We might talk about many things, but there is no insight. We don't understand actually what's going on. And it's still a big problem for all media, including online media and bloggers and citizen journalists, all of them.
And Irina, one of the features of the book is that it's a reminder for people who aren't familiar with Russia, that people have this idea that somehow throughout Soviet and recent Russian history there was an ability to really control everything. And actually it's a reminder quite often that there's quite a lot of incompetence, there's a lack of control very often, and that was not a new thing. This was, going on right back into the sort of Soviet history. Do you think that there's a risk that the Russian FSB and the other interception authorities are actually getting more professional? In a funny sort of way, we might actually be in a situation where there's a better organized and better resourced surveillance state than there was in the 1970s and 80s?
Now, what is different from the Soviet times in terms of secret services? Because the technologies now are getting cheaper and cheaper every day, and to install some kind of powerful surveillance system of all over the country isn't so expensive as it used to be. But at the same time, there are a lot of problems with technology because of the history of the 90s. The security services wasn't ready to create something powerful and something that could really oversee all over the country and all citizens. So today, I don't think that they are capable to do this, but better possibilities to intercept information on the net, from social networks, from emails, Skype, I don't know, VoIP, all our conversations. Get them more possibility to detect proper people and to spy on them, and it's very useful in terms of intimidation, because you try to put pressure on opposition leaders, on people just who are opposed in some kind to authorities, people who are just visible, and it's have a bad impact on all society. But I don't think that a really big brother state is possible. I did believe in this in 2009 when I started to investigate this new surveillance system in Russia. But at the end, after 20 years, I didn't see. I couldn't see that it could be so.
So the kind of distributed nature of the internet in the end will beat Big Brother.
It's also about, it's really a technical problem. The FSB has some, it might be an all-powerful institution, but they have technical problems. For example, Putin was quite sincere when he answered Snowden question and said, well, actually, we are not so like as United States. We don't have this kind of technologies. We don't have this money. The problem was that actually the FSB became a victim of their own, they just didn't want to pay for surveillance. That's why they actually forced companies to buy surveillance equipment, which means that they were unable to build big facilities to intercept and to store intercepted data. That's why, for example, FSB has not, for example, something similar to NSA facility in Utah, because all stuff is stored on servers of these companies, because it costs free for the FSB. And for the FSB, it's an essential question to force companies to pay for everything from surveillance to filtering to blocking and etc.
All the money, more money to go in their own pockets.
If I may add a bit, it's very, very important in this conversation to determine the actual goal of those people who establish and who are decision makers about the surveillance. So if one part of those people who do this are actually working for the government as we understand it, for the security of the regime, but the others actually think of their job as a business. Because when you have this information on hand, when you can persuade companies to pay you for something, it's just a business model, and that's it. Because if I were them, I would use a lot of more capacities than they actually do. Because I would have a data analysis unit to do what market researchers do with our data. If I would really like to predict what will happen on the following elections, on how many people will come to meeting, having all the data they have, you can easily predict the turnout. You can easily see what kind of kind of Facebook activity, online activity, and cookies and internet behavior and behavior as they have an access to everything on our mobile, they could predict lots of things. And it takes but it's not about surveillance, it's about analytical departments, it's about data analysis. What people here in London do about the companies and predicting their revenue and predicting national lottery revenue in the second part of the following year. As they are not doing that, as every time they're so surprised, they really are, with the turnout of the political meetings, one might ask himself, what are the real goals for those guys? Are they really trying to protect Putin, or are they trying to protect themselves as a class, or they're trying to earn as much money as they want? Because their lifestyle is actually resembling Kensington and Chelsea lifestyle. They're not like people who are, we will save our country, patriots. And in conversations with them, you would eventually say look guys, I love my country and you are not loving it anymore. So from what you said, you're cynical. That means that it's not scary, and that's good. On the other hand, Irina said technology becomes so cheap and methods of frightening are so good that they enjoy their job.
Right, let's open it up to the floor. I think we've got microphones to pass around, so please make sure you've got a microphone. Questions, anyone? Yevgeny, can we start with you?
Oh, yes.
Can we just get a microphone? Yevgeny Kiselyov, who was...
My name was mentioned a couple of times. As a matter of fact, I was the first not to survive. Not physically, of course, but as former general director of NTV, which was taken over by the Kremlin very long time ago, in 2001. And well, first of all, let me say that I haven't read the book, so I don't really know what's written in there about myself, but I understand as the authors informed me, there's a whole chapter about Mr. Putin trying to start his campaign of curbing media freedom with the attack on NTV and other media that was privately owned by one of the Russian oligarchs, Vladimir Putin. I don't like the word oligarch as a matter of fact. The oligarchs are those who are now in control of major Russian state-owned companies. They are the oligarchs. People like Igor Sechin, the chairman of Rosneft, or people who, men like, I don't know, even with all my due respect to German Gref, the chairman of Sberbank, the biggest Russian state-owned financial institution, well, he is the oligarch because he is controlling the big state-owned bank, and he is a person who has direct access to the president of Russia. But, well, that was just a remark. I always remember the only meeting I really had with Mr. Putin. That was in the beginning of 2001. I was invited to Kremlin together with a group of NTV journalists. And I think it was an attempt to recruit us, as a matter of fact. It was an act of recruitment on the part of Vladimir Putin, because he wanted to be very nice, and he promised a bright future for us if we finally end our criticism of the government and start to support the government and him personally. And when he understood that we are not taking this bait when he immediately became very hostile and very aggressive and started to intimidate us. And as far as I was concerned, he said, and you, Mr. Kiselov, we know everything about your hour-long phone conversations with Vladimir Gusinsky, the then owner of NTV and Сегодня newspaper and other media that later fell victim to Mr. Putin's campaign. And I asked him, are you trying to imply that my phone has been tapped? And he just smiled. He didn't say anything in reply to that remark. And since that time, I always lived while I was in Russia. For those who do not, and most people here do not follow my journalistic career, and it has been 8 years since I left Russia, and I'm working in Ukraine as a television journalist, but I'm working for Ukrainian television. And I'm not alone there. Many Russian journalists left Russia and are working in Ukraine now, including some very famous ones. But since that time, I always lived with the feeling that with conviction that my phone has been tapped, and they read my email and they have the technical opportunity to follow my text messages, etc., etc. And of course, well, my page on Facebook is available to everyone. But speaking of the electronic surveillance and the complexity of its task, there's something very easy. Just think about it. You can have the technical opportunity. You can have all the hardware and all the software to tap into people's phones. Well, let's imagine that they are targeting the 15% of Russian population that is allegedly against Mr. Putin. Well, the pollsters in Russia are telling us or trying to convince us that 85% of the Russians are now supporting Vladimir Putin. That means that 15% of the Russians do not support them. And this is the target audience of Mr. Putin's eavesdroppers. Well, that's over 21 million people. And so even if you tap and record all their conversations, all their text messages, if you have the technical possibility of breaking their passwords and reading their email, well, somebody has then to put it on paper, to summarize, to analyze it, and this is impossible. That's why they are following. You can have everything. Like we can tap a word or a sentence in our browsers, and immediately we've got, just a sea of information on any issue, but we'll never be able to read all of it. Same applies to the, what I call the primary results of electronic surveillance. You can have all the conversations in the FSB computer servers, but somebody has to read through it, to analyze, and then to produce several pages of paper with a top secret logo that would finally land on Mr. Putin's desk. And that's what they are telling me, that Mr. Putin believes only those documents, highly classified, that are prepared every day, and not the stuff on the computer that one can read on the computer without any special classifying logos at the top. This is one observation, and observation number two is that, well, of course, today, in my opinion, all Russian politics is about is Mr. Putin's campaign to stay in power as long as possible, preferably for life. And if he needs to create, I don't know, a system of total electronic surveillance, if he needs to close down online media, if he needs to create a new great Russian firewall against the rest of the online media community in the remaining world, he will do that. But at the same time, technology goes further, and you can't fight the technical progress. Especially in I don't believe that a country which is, unfortunately, it's my country, it's my homeland, but we all understand that Russia is lagging behind the rest of civilized world in very many areas, in most of the spheres. And I can't find the reason why should Russia be more successful, for example, in electronic surveillance, if it's not successful in, I don't know, automobile industry or any industry at all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Questions?
First of all, I would like to thank all the guests for sharing their knowledge. Personally, I would like to thank Andrei for a great website, agentura.ru, which investigates the security structures of Russia. It also has an English section, by the way. So my question is, based on all your experience, would you say that all means of intelligence, such as deep packet inspection and others, are inherently bad, or perhaps can they be used in the context of proactive police work, or as long as there are such tools, they're bound to be used for oppression of political opposition?
Well, I think that, of course, well, technologies, deep packet inspection was firstly a commercial technology. And it was imported to Russia, firstly, for purely commercial reasons. Mobile phone operators wanted to shape traffic. They wanted to get rid of people who use Skype on their phones and who downloaded lots of things on their phones. They wanted to shape traffic, to jump to actual traffic. And it's even if you're talking about commercial use of this technology, to me it's slightly questionable. You have some users, you have your customers, and you don't tell them, but actually you shape the traffic. They force them to use some services, but you do not tell them that you decide to make it slightly more difficult for them to use some other services. But for example, even in the West, you can go to some hotels and you suddenly find out that Skype is too slow. Sometimes it really might be very slow. Sometimes it might be caused by technical problems. Sometimes it might be used by things like DPI, because DPI helps to analyze traffic and to close down some of these services. So essentially, this technology. Excuse me? Yeah, and it's about services, it's about content, and I think it's such a big provocation for security services when you just get for free this technology, which was not developed by the military-industrial complex, which was developed by greatest companies which are very good at developing internet technologies, and you are tempted all the time to use these technologies to fight. Well, first to fight extremists. When you think, well, to fight extremists, you need first to understand maybe to try to prevent them from doing some crimes. So in this case, you need to create the list of would-be troublemakers, of would-be extremists. So when you have you end up with the list of would-be troublemakers, when you start spying on them, thinking of, well, there are some categories of people who should be put on the special list, and essentially, and very, very, very soon you end up with the police state. So I think some technologies really are it's too big provocation for security services.
Edin, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that. I mean, is it possible to have technologies which are designed to deal with the kind of like people that are trying to blow up major cities?
Yeah, of course.
And not let it be used for spying on political opposition?
I mean, it needs to be done in accordance with the law, and it's the legal framework that really determines that. And it's not just a legal framework nationally, but one that's also in accordance with human rights standards and in accordance with those principles. So Mr. Kiselov was talking about having all that data but not being able to read it because there's so much of it. But then there's companies, and as you talk about in your book, that work on exactly that problem, about trying to do the biometrics and voice prints to identify what people are talking about, and hundreds of thousands of them. So when that, I mean, as you know yourself now with voice recognition technology, it's pretty rubbish at the moment. But when that becomes sophisticated enough to work, what's the legal footing that's governing that, and where's the safeguards and oversight that need to be in place for that to actually exist?
One of the fascinating bits of the book is about the Russians were really good at voice recognition stuff long before digital arrived. You know, they were good at this stuff when it was all in analog form, but still there's that strange suspicion that you have when you're working in Moscow that sometimes when you say certain words, your phone just cuts dead. And you know, there'd be a game of Moscow journalists that they would sort of deliberately just throw certain words into conversations and see if they cut dead. And sometimes it really did seem as if it worked, that you'd get cut off if you talked about anything. I'm interested by the legal framework as well, because one of the other things that comes out in the book is that actually there is a legal framework. You might sort of think, oh, it's kind of Russia, it's Putin's Russia, it's crazy, they can just do what they want, when they want, how they want. But actually, there is a legal framework. There are rules about what they can do. I don't know if you can say a bit about that, whether they stick to those rules, and whether they kind of could work if in a different situation, or actually is it out of control?
Well, it seems that we live in the country of imitations, because in this, for example, we have the requirement in the law where the FSB should get a court warrant to start interception. But in the practice, the FSB officer, when he gets this warrant, he has the right to show this warrant only to his superior, because the company personnel has no right to see this warrant. That's the first thing. Second thing is, yes, we have some rules for the FSB in terms of surveillance when they investigate crimes. The problem is that the FSB is a combination of two things. It's, on the one hand, it's a law enforcement agency, and in this capacity we can open the criminal investigation, and this criminal investigation might end up in the court. And then you can see all proceedings. You might ask, your lawyer might ask for all this documentation about court warrants, etc. But the FSB is also a counterintelligence agency. And in this capacity, they can do actually whatever they want. We tried to find the statistics of court warrants for surveillance. And we found out, well, we were lucky actually to find some statistics about how many court warrants were issued, say in 2012 or 2010, and how this actually the number changed over the times. But the problem was, from the beginning, we were told by the FSB officers, look, it's only part of the picture, because what we actually intercepted when we did this counterintelligence activity, it's not included in any kind of statistics.
So at the same time that the number of warrants was doubling in the times that Putin was in trouble,
it doesn't include anything
there was
about
also beyond that a whole load of... Okay. Any more questions?
Hello, congratulations on your book. This is not a surveillance question, this is a political question, chronological question rather. I've read about 2/3 of your book, and you are quite positive and complimentary about Dmitry Medvedev.
No.
I haven't read far enough.
No, of course not. Of course
Does
not.
he have a future?
No, of course not. No, they think actually, to be honest, they think that maybe actually they feared that Medvedev might decide to go to the second term in 2011, because the problem was that Dmitry Medvedev was such a pleasant guy for many in Russia, specifically for the middle classes. He talked about modernization, he talked about some sort of development, he played with internet technologies, but essentially he was also as a product of his system, because just one example, and I think it's a really important thing. In 2011, two people in Russia said that they are extremely fond of Lee Kuan Yew, the authoritarian leader of Singapore. One of them was Dmitry Medvedev, and another one was Alexei Navalny, which tells something about the Russian opposition. Because actually, when people think that the only goal is to fight corruption, well, you can find that in some authoritarian states, they're pretty good at fighting corruption. It cannot be the only goal. You also need to think about other things. And that was the biggest problem for Dmitry Medvedev. The middle classes just wanted some representation, and also they wanted some places, some new place, because they got some aspirations, some ambitions. They wanted these ambitions to be fulfilled. Medvedev seemed to promise them that. That's why he was supported. But of course he was not a liberal. And remember that it was Medvedev who invented the new thing for Russia. He actually invented the idea of fighting extremism in Russia. Before that, Putin played only with the word terrorist. Terrorists, everybody were terrorists. The North Caucasus was the main problem. It was all about brutal and tough language. Medvedev came up with the idea of, well, we need to use preventive measures to fight extremism. And we got the special department inside of the Interior Ministry to fight extremism. We got the list, the blacklist of organizations and categories of people who might be a trouble for the authorities, like youth organizations, religious organizations, trade unions, all this stuff. That happened because of Medvedev. So that's why, no.
And by the way, it was that department that then turned on the political opposition in 2011-12.
Yeah, that's right.
They were the guys that were turning up. Just one story about Medvedev. Eventually, just before I left Moscow, somebody close to the Kremlin finally nailed someone down and said, okay, when Putin finally kind of stands aside in 2024 or whatever, you know, who's coming up? And eventually this guy just said, well, Medvedev. So it kind of never ends in their vision at the moment. It just it carries on forever. Many more questions in the front. Oh, finding one there.
Hi. So my question is more about technology companies coming out from the West and operating in Russia. So one of the things that you've established already is that, you know, you have this sheer, just huge volumes of information, and obviously not enough people who can process this information. Something, you know, that you've talked about, Tony, about data analytics. So to what extent can the Russian state co-opt companies like Google or Facebook or any other companies to provide some of this data analysis to the Russian state in order for them to be able to operate in Russia in the same way that it's happened in China?
Really, we don't know, because you know that we have a new legislation in Russia that required from all companies who have a deal with personal data of Russian citizens to store all their data on the Russian soil, so to relocate or rent service in Russia. And some companies already agreed to comply with the law, like eBay,
PayPal,
Apple.
Apple.
As far as we know, Apple rented some service in Moscow, and we don't know for sure what Google have decided, but there is some information that some servers are already in Russia, and it seems that it wouldn't be. Facebook refused to comply with the law. That is really very good, but we are not expected that many companies, many international global internet companies will oppose to this policy. We are expected that will comply.
Yeah, that's one of the problems. But when you are talking about analyzing data, To be frank, it was the biggest technological problem for the Russian security services for decades. They don't know how to deal with big data. It's one of the biggest secrets of the FSB, but actually they need technology from the United States to analyze data, and they are buying stuff in the United States, and they were very angry when they were subject of some limitations in terms of analyzing databases, and they still struggle with these problems. We try to understand, for example, what is going on with Russian technologies and system of monitoring social networks. And what we found out is that all Russian systems, and there are many of them, and actually, the fact is that there are so many of these companies and there are so many products, means that the system is very weak. They can produce very small things. For example, one of the most popular program inside of the Interior Ministry and the FSB is capable to only 20 people might work simultaneously in this system. It means that every department should buy the product. They cannot actually create one big browser database and to analyze all this data, which is a good thing.
And if they were analyzing all these things properly, there wouldn't happen one thing, which I put in my research. So you know that in Instagram you have geolocation tags. What if you start to look what's going on in Syria and Aleppo right now? You would find a lot of photos from there. Does the situation differ in Damascus? You would find some photos made 2 hours or even 15 minutes ago. And then let's start to look at the headquarters of the government FSO, so which is like the Kremlin telecommunication agency within the FSB. Do they have some photos on Instagram from there? Oh, look, there are 2 engineers working on their computers. It's probably boring, and they try to make selfies in front of this place and geotag it. The same would happen with the FSB, and the same would happen with the more like secret agencies. You just find a place on the map, and you would see a lot of people just doing selfies in the office, and
This, by the way, is something that I've not seen on international social networks. It's something that Contact actually provides. It's a map, and you can just click on a place and show me all the pictures that have been taken in this area in the last day. So you can just click on Tartus in Syria, and all the Russian soldiers' selfies all pop up. It's great.
And so you would suppose, so if FSB will be monitoring properly Instagram, they would at least find that their own contributors post pictures of on the Instagram from the secret cabinets. The same with the military zones, which you can't just enter on your car, but you see a person who enjoys his life as a small servant in there. Oh, look, here's his car, here's his newborn baby, he's having like a rest somewhere. You actually see everything about him. And, like, guys, do you have any idea how much information we can know about you while you're spying on us?
And I think that's the key sort of final thought in your book, isn't it? That in the end, Russians, not Russians working actively against the state, but just ordinary Russians doing stuff on the internet, will mean that it's going to be very, very hard to control information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this example about soldiers contacted, I think it's a fascinating thing, because the truth was exposed not by activists, not by journalists, not by, I don't know, bloggers, but by soldiers themselves.
But they weren't even soldiers who were trying to say, isn't it terrible we've been posted to Ukraine? They were just posting pictures for their mates.
Yes, that's right.
That's the point.
I think this is the beauty about the internet.
Yeah.
It was done unintentionally, which is good.
Can I propose a question as a kind of reality check? I worked for 18 years with Index on Censorship during the Soviet period, with Campaign Against Psychiatric Abuses, with the Russian SMOT Free Trade Union. Alexander Poldabinik, who was on all our lists, was just a year ago sitting in Chatham House, and all the Russian analysts were there, and they said, well, Alexander, if it's so bad, why are you sitting here in front of us? You can go in and out of the country. I feel that this panel, it must be a little worried that it's being listened to, because you're really not confronting the problem, which is state encryption. With Snowden and all of this, there's a gigantic, the nuclear state. Russia has huge nuclear weapons. It has a command control center under the Urals. The issue with Bradley Manning and with Snowden was that it revealed the work of art of the NSA and of all the military intelligence, which is a huge thing. No, there isn't a total analysis of information. That's almost impossible. And in fact, there are almost no secrets. Almost everything is in the public domain. But there's spies and there's encryption. And one of the huge problems that hacking and all the freedom of, I mean, we have a First and Fourth Amendment crisis right now. Google has 170 lawsuits against it in Europe alone. So their concept of having a completely free First Amendment thing is going. Gradually, everything is becoming encrypted, but temporarily. And the way that that thing is manipulated has a lot to do with whether we will ever be able to find out the information we need to know to run democratic societies. So, I mean, I think it's a much more serious problem than you're talking about. In Israel, where there seems to be freedom of speech, when Duncan Campbell went down to interview Vanunu, he had to stand at the top of St. George's Cathedral so his lips wouldn't be read. When I was dealing with a constitutional lawyer in New York, this is not the Stasi in East Berlin, we had to walk through the streets, and we had to stand on street corners looking away from the buildings, and we went into a cafe, and 20 minutes later, this constitutional, we have to leave immediately because you recognize somebody. I mean, this thing is ferocious. It's extremely powerful, and gradually we're losing information in it because they're much better at doing that than we are. But you make it sound as if Russia, which is part of the rivalry with China, which is extremely good at doing this, and America, which is ferociously good at doing it, that Russia's not doing anything at all. But you're sitting there that's all rather naive, it can't afford it and everything. You don't need a lot of money to do this. Chinese are, per capita, a much poorer country than Russia probably, but they have a gigantic surveillance. Now, isn't there something more going on in Russia than what you're describing?
Can I just add something to that, which is this sort of ongoing thing we've got with attribution worldwide, and a very good reputation that Russian and Ukrainian hackers have for being protected. They're fantastic at their jobs. They're sort of, world renowned and very well revered for this. It's almost as if I sort of see it that Russia doesn't need to do anything domestically in terms of, they sort of or have a fantastic technical capability when they can have. Perform a means to an end abroad, if you will, because attribution sort of just this sort of grey area at the moment. So have you got any thoughts on that? I mean, have you delved into it and whatnot?
Well, the thing is that actually when we are talking about capabilities of security services, we need to remember this thing about natural advantages. And of course, well, the United States, they enjoy natural advantages in terms of traffic, which is coming from the United States. That's why we are actually the world leader in interception. It's not only about technology, it's just about traffic. So for Russia, the natural advantages, of course, is not about lines, because we don't have submarine lines. We are connected to the world by subterranean lines, very few of them, and we don't have traffic, European traffic passing through the Russian territory to China, because there are some other ways. So Russia tried to play out their own natural advantages. They remember that in the 2000s, they played with the idea of patriotic hackers, and we got these attacks on Estonia, on Lithuania, on Latvia, and Georgia. But what happened next? In 2014, every cyber expert I talked to told me they expected huge DDoS attacks on Ukraine, which never happened. What we got instead, we got the offensive launched by trolls. So in this case, Russian authorities understood quite cleverly that the natural advantage here is not to try to play on and to try to actually to do this hacking stuff, but to try to deal with Russian-speaking audience in the former Soviet Union, and also to try to play some games in Eastern Europe, because we share some important things, all of us, I mean, in Eastern Europe, like, for example, this feeling of disappointment with the West, which might be very skillfully exploited by propaganda, and that became the natural advantages for Russia, not computer hacking, not hackers who might say, I don't know, be stationed in St. Petersburg or Moscow trying to do things and just to close down some website in Estonia. In a way, these things about propaganda prove to be much more effective than all these technological advantages Russia might have if they use mathematical methods to do stuff. We got some reports about really sophisticated attacks only this year, I think. And again, it's a big question about attribution, because there are some reports that Russian hackers are behind this and that. Actually, we are talking about Russian hackers, Russian-speaking hackers, people living in where? In Ukraine, in Russia, in Kazakhstan, maybe in Israel, maybe in the Baltic countries. That's a big problem of attribution. But nevertheless, the thing about propaganda now works much better, and it's much more. It seems that for the Russian authorities, it's much more important, and they put lots of efforts in it.
We know that propaganda is effective from propaganda. I mean, basically, we actually don't know if Russian propaganda is effective because we know that they're effective from those who say it through the public media, and they're actually part of the propaganda. I mean, what if 90% of the population who watches the TV actually thinks that they are dumb idiots, but they are told that all of the rest believes in this? So you would think of yourself as an exile, or like around me are like dumb 86% of people, and I'm the only one who actually knows what's going on. And then you do think like, okay, let's check. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. And you go online, and when you see online on Facebook lots of posts or comments on the website, and you see like people say like Putin is our hero and the opposition are like betray us. But those texts are published by special groups of people who are paid to publish this, and you again persuaded that like all the rest in your country are dumb idiots. So each one of them could not believe in propaganda. He knows from propaganda that propaganda works.
Oh, you're very optimistic.
It's true. I think the FSB, and not just FSB, but the people that work with Putin, like Soldatov, I mean, they are the masters of the
I mean, there is a cargo cult, when you're trying to build something that actually doesn't work. You're trying to build propaganda, for example, trying to do it like Goebbels did or something like this. But then you can have a reverse cargo cult, and like Ekaterina Shulman introduced this term. That's how Russian like government building actually works. So you do not working propaganda. You know that it's not working. You're trying to persuade everybody that it actually works.
Edin, can we just pick up on the point from the front row? I mean, there's sort of been a theme about, yes, they want to do this stuff, but they're maybe not being that competent. What's your view? Do you think that actually that's too optimistic a view, and actually the Russians are not only up to everything the Americans are up to, but also for worse reasons at times?
I mean, I don't know Russia at all. The impression I get is that they just don't need to. So we saw before Putin actually got elected into power, with the amount of effort they spent getting, media control and getting on the news then, that was an intense campaign because it looked as though he wasn't going to get into power. Now it just seems as though, he's quite likely to stay there for a while. So you don't need to actually take advantage of all the surveillance capabilities that you may have.
And Andrei, what do you say to the point? I mean, do you think that actually you're only scratching the surface of the capabilities that they've got, and there's actually a lot more in there, or are Russian people in that world saying to you, we just can't do what the Americans can do?
Well, the thing is, let me tell you a story. When we investigated with Press International the Olympic Games and what kind of surveillance were installed in Sochi before the Olympics, and we published our report in The Guardian, and it was a few months before the Olympics, and of course we expected all kind of nasty things which might happen with us. Instead, the Russian authorities was smart enough to publish a story quoting some experts, pro-government experts, with the headline, yes, we would spy on you, but it's all for your security. So actually they used our investigation to send a message to people who would go to the Olympics. Please be careful. So in a way, I think I'm quite certain that they use all this technology as a stick in hand. They can do what you want. Be careful, and because it works, it actually works. It worked in Sochi. It works during the Olympics. We got only Pussy Riot, and that was all. We didn't have any big manifestations in town during the Olympics because many even Western journalists came to us asking questions about, can I bring my laptop with me? So it was a big thing for everybody. Everybody were very, very certain that their communications might be intercepted.
Whenever you go to a government event in Moscow, they always give you a little free flash drive. Don't use it.
Military encryption, you're still not discussing this.
the strategic balances are based on encryption.
Yeah, that's right.
True.
Yes, true. But the problem is that well, I'm trying to be as factual as I can. So a few months ago, there was a big conference in Moscow, and internet service providers gathered trying to talk to the authorities about new storm boxes. And they told the authorities essentially one thing: you force us to buy the new equipment. But the problem is that we know, because we are engineers, that this equipment cannot do nothing with HTTPS. Just nothing. This HTTPS cannot be intercepted by source. That's a fact. And we cannot understand why you force us to buy this equipment, because it's absolutely useless. As our forces say, well, it's not your problem, forget about it, you just need to buy this one, and that one. So it seems that we try to solve the problem with encryption by other means. And the only possible solution we found right now is to force companies to relocate their servers, because in this case they can start actually intercepting things before the message is encrypted. That's the solution they found right now. Maybe tomorrow it would be completely different, but it seems that technically they don't know what to do with HTTPS, which is now is the basic technology for the internet, used by all big services. I don't know, maybe I didn't answer your question, but that's all I have.
Any more questions? One over there. Is that
Last
time's nearly
question.
up? Okay.
Is there a grasshopper in the room? Can you hear it? Or is it just me?
Air conditioner.
Air conditioner.
But every time you publish a book and every time you publish a report in The Guardian and every time I saw you in Moscow in an interview in this coffee shop where you waltz in there and, you know, and we sit and it's nice and it's very critical what you say. And I always think, I hope you two will be okay. And, you know, in a way, everyone, I think, wonders, are you here despite Putinism or because of Putinism? Are you part, you know, are a few critical authors and experts on the FSB part of the program to show that Putinism is not a totalitarian system but an authoritarian system? Or are you actually just super courageous and we have to fear for your life every minute of the day?
Well, the thing is that, of course, we cannot answer this question, because you might assume that this answer is also part of the plot. And so my answer is that we were able to work for the Russian publications last time in 2009. And then we worked for Novaya Gazeta, which is by far the most independent newspaper in the country. But even this newspaper didn't tolerate our reporting. So the thing is that, well, yes, we can do something, but first of all, if we want to get something published, we need to find a way to publish it first in the West. And it's a very long and emotional story for us. For example, there was a time when I worked for Echo Moskvy. I reported Beslan for Echo Moskvy. But many things happened after that. It's difficult. And for example, many Russian publications, when we got this report in The Guardian about Sochi, told us, look, it's good that you have this report in The Guardian. Can we translate this report? But we ask you, can we say this byline, that it was published by The Guardian? Because we do not want to take responsibility. And our first book, The New Nobility, was published in 2010, and the Russian version of the book appeared only a year later, and immediately it provoked the visit from the FSB to the printing house. For some reason, they decided to visit printing house, asking who paid for that, and well, the answer was, of course, the publisher paid. But nevertheless, it's the situation. You might say something, but you have no access to. You cannot get any comments from security services. That's completely shielded, and also you cannot work for the Russian media. So it's a very special kind of. Well, it's really special.
Andrei, let's do an experiment. Let me take an interview from you, and we will try to broadcast it through Echo of Moscow and see what happens.
Okay.
Just a little bit further. You're answering my question. If you ask Master Gessens, he says that 15% that opposes Putin electorally, that if you speak out publicly in any of the cities, and there are plenty of people who would like to all over Russia, you're put in jail for a few months. How come you haven't been put in jail?
You mean me personally? Well, the thing is that we have a strategy for how to deal with pressure from security services, and because the very first time the FSB approached us was in 2002 because of our reporting of Nordost, and our strategy for all these years, by the way, it's one of the reasons why we are so critical of Snowden, because he failed to do the same thing, is to go public all the time. So when we are approached by the FSB and they will try to talk quietly with us about something, to propose some deal or to propose some meetings in secret, we always go public. For many years we have had some arrangements with some media in Russia that if something happened with us in terms of this kind of talk, immediately it goes reported by new media, and that makes us a bit, in the eyes of the FSB, it means that first you are not ready to any kind of game, because for them, if you accept that any kind of meeting in secret, that means that you are already ready for some sort of game. For them, it's already the next stage. We just need to find the proper tools how to talk to you, how to force you to do things. So we always show them that we are absolutely crazy, that we go public about anything. And for a while, it works. I don't know I cannot predict the future. I cannot predict what might happen, say, this Saturday. But
Andrei, in any case, we can prevent something bad if it
happens.
I think
that's Andrei explained a great strategy, but I don't think that it could help if anything bad.
I think it's worth saying that you have to remember that the number of very prominent journalists and opposition politicians that have been either killed or imprisoned for a lengthy period of time is actually quite small in recent years. Of course, there have been terrible examples, and some of them, personal friends of people in this room, but it actually hasn't been that 300 journalists have been gunned down every year, and it hasn't been the case that 300 opposition politicians have been gunned down every year. They don't need to do that.
Yeah.
It just isn't necessary. They can control it without going that far.
I'm asking the question because I broadcast 5 times on Voice of Russia Radio, because I think Voice of Russia Radio is more free speech than, for example, Fox, to be honest. And one of the editors of Al Jazeera was saying this here when there was a big argument with Ukrainian journalists. He said, well, you're going to have to understand Americans have become fed up with our press because it's heavily censored. And actually, my impression was when I was on Voice of Russia Radio, we weren't being censored. I saw all sorts of appalling things and got away with it. And the head of Human Rights Watch has been on with Peter Lavelle more than once, sometimes at length. It's not broadcast in Russia, but surely it can be picked up in Russia. So, I'm trying to work out, is it in fact the case that Russia is a more free speech society than one might imagine?
Well, we used to work in Nova Gazeta where Andrei was killed. Excuse me, it has a lasting effect on all journalists in the country. When we launched our website, agentur.ru, in 2000, our aspiration was to have a team of journalists from many media to report about security services, because then every Russian publication had an investigative department. Now, if you ask me how many investigative journalists we have in Moscow, I would say maybe 6, maybe 7. We have how many investigative departments we have, and how many newspapers. We have Vedomosti, Forbes, 2 people in each of them. We have Nova Gazeta, 1 guy. That makes 3. Okay, say 5. 6 in total. That's what we got. So I don't think we enjoy freedom of expression in Russia.
And nobody listens to Voice of Russia, so certainly not in Russia. So.
Certainly listen to Peter Lavelle.
Well. Okay, lovely. I'm sure the book is available at all good booksellers. But it's a fascinating read, I have to say. It's a really good and surprising history of the internet in Russia and the attempts to control that and traditional media, and kind of open question as to where it goes next.
And
so thank you all of you for coming here.
Thank you.
Just say that the books are also for sale here this evening, so you can grab a copy, and hopefully Andrei and Irina will be kind enough to sign your copy.
Sure.
If you'd like.
Sure. Thank you.